and social health. Those 6 years are when children need the right stimulation, the right connection to other people, physical exercise, and so forth. What happens is, and so they are going to be best protected and helped along the way with their development if they have 0 to very little screen time. And in this case, that I really would include television as well, although television is not nearly as addictive as interactive screens. So in the first 2 years of life, our recommendation is 0 screens, including television. 0. Okay. And this is hard to achieve, especially in families where there are older kids. You know, how do you balance all of that? And it's very difficult. But I'm just telling you what is optimal. Mm-hmm. And then once they've turned 2 and in those toddler and preschool years, it's, again, the less the better. So maybe up to an hour of screen time, but again, not interactive screens. Let them maybe occasionally watch a movie that'll go for 2 hours. But again, minimal screen time. Once they enter elementary school, an hour a day is probably not going to harm them, and that might now start including some appropriate video games that are pro-social rather than anti-social in their content. But again, limiting it. An hour, half an hour of video game play will probably not harm development. Once they get up to middle school, 2 hours, and beyond high school, again, really no more than 2 hours of entertainment online would be our recommendation, because throughout childhood, there's so many other things that kids need to be learning that requires their time, including how to handle boredom. You know, today, because kids always have screens in their hands, they are not developing the ability to be bored. And out of boredom comes creativity. You know, you have to think, what am I going to do other than looking at my screen so that I'm not bored anymore? What's something I want to accomplish?
Right. Yeah, because I know parents these days, they're putting their children in front of a screen, in front of the television, way before 2 years old. I would say at 1 year old, they're letting them watch all types of things, mainly maybe before 2. I know they're watching the cartoons. And some of them are educational, the Sesame Street and different programs that are designed specifically for young children. But in your opinion, you're saying it's not a good idea until they're at least 2 to introduce them to any screen time. So,
right, and then once you do introduce them to screen time, something like Sesame Street is a wonderful program. So there are some good programs, but there are a lot of programs, cartoons for kids that are actually really not good for them. They're
Some of them aren't even for children.
Right, but a lot of the ones that are designed for kids are still not good for kids. You know, they're too fast-paced, they're too chaotic, overstimulating. They're not helping kids, develop. And the consequences really are things like, a term was coined by researchers called virtual autism. And and more people are studying the possibility that very early introduction of screens with newborns and in those first 2 years of life might be actually creating what looks like autism. And and in particular, it means that the kids, because parents and child are not interacting enough, or caregivers and child are not interacting with one another and talking to one another and, snuggling and playing and so forth, that the child actually becomes more attached to the screen than to people. because
yeah.
that's what they have in their hands. That's what they're interacting with.
Right,
And
I can imagine.
that's very autistic, to be attached to something inanimate like a screen, and that they fail to develop social skills and good social skills and the ability to read social cues, body language, tone of voice, all of that. They're not developing that, again, because they're spending time with screens rather than in human-to-human interaction.
Right.
And so they may not have genetically based autism, but they end up looking mildly autistic. So that's just one example, like ADHD, attention deficit disorder. That is something else, which can be, the brain in children can be wired for short attention span rather than good long attention span if they're in front of screens all the time, because the screens are constantly changing. Right. Their screen use, their video game play requires short attention span rather than long attention span. So these are just examples. The demand, a child's demand for immediate gratification is reinforced through video games and other things online, rather than them learning how to delay gratification and, patiently pursue a goal, put up with the frustrations of not succeeding at first and try something else and get help if you need it, and then eventually you achieve your goal. As a child, like building a fort or constructing something interesting in the living room of the house, if a child hasn't developed the ability to tolerate that, yes, and imagination as well. So many, many ways in which child development can be negatively impacted by early introduction of screens.
Yes, I see.
And
wow.
I'll mention one more thing, which is it's very controversial. There are many people who want to deny this, but the research is absolutely clear that violence in video game play, where the gamer is committing violent acts, because that's the nature of the game, that it does, in fact, increase children's aggression. And it may not turn, I'm not saying it turns them into school shooters at all. I'm not saying that. But it will increase their tendency to speak and behave aggressively toward their peers in the family and so forth. So violence in games does impact children.
I've seen that, yes, definitely. As a former substitute teacher, there's so much, I've seen so much violence in the elementary schools, let alone the middle schools, but it's starting with the elementary schools, and the children, you can't sit still, and they want to, slap another child, or I'm breaking up fights, and I'm like, what in the world is going on? And you talk to them, and their parents are letting them watch all kinds of violent programs on TV and adult programs when they should actually be in bed. So we only have about 6 minutes left to the end of the show. I'd like to give out the call. I know we're going to have you back. The call-in number, listeners, if you'd like to slide a question in to Dr. Cash, is 347-945-7433, 347-945-7433. Call in now and hold if you have a question. So we're going to move right along, Dr. Cash. So we've been talking about all of these difficulties and problems with Internet and video games, but who actually bears responsibility for the problems we're seeing in so many children and young adults? Because some people will say it's the video game producers. Others will say it's the parents. And so in your opinion, what's the answer?
Well, I think the answer is that all of us bear responsibility. I think governments need to start regulating some of these things, and government is really not paying attention. They are in other countries, but they're not here. I think that parents need to understand, be educated, and understand what they're dealing with so that they can take appropriate action. The video game companies, it's all about pursuit of the dollar, pursuit of profit. It's not at all about the social good. And so I think they bear responsibility and have an ethical responsibility to be thinking about these problems and taking them into account. I think schools are part of the problem because schools have just blindly, I believe, adopted the policy of trying to get kids, very young kids, to have computers and to do their schoolwork on screens. And there's mounting research that is showing that that can be a grave mistake, but schools are doing it anyway. I recommend to your audience a really fascinating book called Screen Schooled, which talks about this at length, as does another great book called Glow Kids. So if you want to learn about, educational problems with the educational system as regards to this problem, those are good books to read. So I think everybody, in the end, bears some responsibility and can make a difference by taking some positive and constructive action.
I agree. It's not just, like I say, it takes a village. So it's not just one person trying to just solve everything. We all have to work together.
And let me just comment. Another example is, think how many parents have to work late. They have to work until 5 or 6, and their kids might be home. They might get home from school, and there's this gap of time. And there isn't available, affordable, really good after-school programs. Like, that's something that is needed, good after-school care. Yes, and, another example of what society needs to think about and provide for kids so that they're not home alone and getting in trouble.
Yeah, Home Alone. I remember that movie. That little boy certainly got himself in a lot of trouble. So we're down to our last 2 minutes. I'd like for you to close us out with any final remarks, and how can people get in contact with you if they feel their child has a video addiction, or they'd like to have their child analyzed to see if they have an addiction and to get your help if they do have an addiction?
Sure. Well, our website address is www.netaddictionrecovery.com, and our phone number, I actually never can quite remember it, so I'm looking at it here, is 800-682-6934.
Okay, and that's 800
and
682-6934. Okay, got it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we're happy to talk to anyone who calls in and see if we can help them.
Okay, and any final remarks about how we can all do more to get involved with, observing our children and being more proactive?
Well, try to read about it and get educated about it. A wonderful book is, our book, the one that Kim and I wrote, Video Games and Your Kids, is a good book to explain child development and the needs of kids and what parents can do to start setting appropriate boundaries with kids. These other books I've mentioned will give you information about the school system so that you can go, once you're educated and understand what's going on, go and advocate at the schools for what you think is right. Try to talk to your neighbors and friends about the problem and come together to support one another in setting the boundaries you feel ought to be set that kids are going to definitely resist. But, we need to support one another. It's hard to do it when you feel isolated and alone and everybody's looking at you cross-eyed because you want to go against the trend.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cash. It has been my pleasure. Please come back and join us in the near future. I'm sure you'll have more information to share with us. So you have a fantastic day. Just want to tell